Chapter 366. How do you want to play? Since you've already come all this way, don't even think about leaving. Han Shuo's face split into an evil grin as he executed the bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts with his Demon Slayer Edge, letting the sky be segmented by a bloody red light. The Demon Slayer Edge produced sharp bloody lights one after the other. Together they became a mass of bloody red light that swept towards the seemingly young dark elf Saikong. As Saikong saw this swirling mass of bloody light releasing a deadly, terrifyingly baleful aura that seemed sharper than a honed blade, he began retreating even faster. The bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts closely and relentlessly pursued Saikong like a parasitic apparition. Along the way it came to the not-so-spaciously drilled underground passageway from which Saikong had entered. An enormous hail-like downfall of broken rocks fell as the bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts tore through the tunnel, forcefully broadening the underground passageway by a fold. As the couple of dark elves entered, they saw a mass of red blade-like lights closely pursuing Saikong. One of them yelled, "Protect the elder." A few truly young dark elves bravely stood in front of Saikong without thinking about their own safety. Torn and crushed by the bloody light, their remaining pieces of their minced bodies were scattered among the rocks below. After experiencing the bloody light's powers, Saikong was truly frightened out of his wits as he began to run at a breakneck pace. The crystal ball that had been grasped in his hands all along began glowing a misty blue, using a bit of the evil goddess's power bestowed within. The light from the crystal ball began rapidly weaving a protective screen as thin as a cicada's wing as it wove through the air like a snake. The bloody light bombarded the top of the protective screen. The intricate linking of thousands of strands of light gave the faintly radiating blue a powerful defense and began rapidly shredding the multiple bloody red lights. As the protective screen that was as thin as a cicada's wing shattered with a loud bang, Saikong had long since seized the chance to tumble out of the cave, albeit frightened and his back damp from cold sweat long ago. Saikong had obviously realized that although he had already lived for a couple hundreds of years, he really wasn't a match for the Han Shuo inside. As one's age increased, one's fear of death also increased, and Saikong was no exception to that. The moment he experienced Han Shuo's power, he immediately threw away the thought of fighting Han Shuo to the death. Instead, he began retreating even faster than before, directly fleeing until he was in front of a purple veil tent. "Matriarch, forgive my incompetence, but there is a young necromancer inside with an incredibly powerful ability. Not only could I not capture him, but I was even forced to retreat back here." Saikong's nerves were frayed as he trembled when reporting to Adele within the purple veil tent. "Idiot, if you can't even take down a young necromancer, then all your years of life has been truly useless." Adele, who had been smiling merrily, suddenly became angry after hearing what was just said. 10 silk-like black grass strands that were as flexible as tentacles extended from within the purple veil tent, firmly binding up the fearful Saikong. The black strands seemed to be even more tenacious than metal, causing the trussed up Saikong to feel his limbs gradually lose blood. Saikong's breathing gradually became laborious as his body trembled and his veins began to pop from the pressure exerted by the silky strands. The surrounding dark elf elders all began feeling apprehensive as they helplessly looked at Saikong bound by the silk as his skin began to tear and blood began to cover him from head to toe. Even though Saikong was her favored boy toy, no one dared to plead for mercy. Women were the most vicious indeed. If she even felt the tiniest dissatisfaction, she would immediately begin treating them cruelly, causing blood to lavishly decorate the ground. Saikong felt a bone-piercing like pain, yet because he was bound too tightly he couldn't even scream. Instead, he could only softly whimper. Nevertheless, he still did not dare to beg for forgiveness. Seemingly extremely afraid of Adele. Breaking the unbearable silence, Adele coldly snorted within the purple veil tent only after seeing Saikong faltering for breath. Afterwards, the black light binding Saikong slithered back into the purple veil tent like a demon snake. Due to his weak and paralyzed body, Saikong collapsed on top of his own pool of blood. Only he continued to persevere as before, kowtowing and happily saying, "Thank you, Matriarch, many thanks for your mercy, Matriarch." The purple veil tent was suddenly lifted by a light purple colored arm. An arm that could send the hearts of men into a fluster. It brimmed with a bewitching luster, an alluring full and boneless arm. After the tent tent flap was lifted open, a beautiful woman appeared. She was like a bringer of catastrophes, capable of making all living things go crazy for her as she knitted her brows walking out from inside. The beautiful woman's entire body was covered with an exotic light purple skin, yet she had a head full of long emerald-like green hair and two sharp ears indicating her race as an elf. She nearly possessed all of the characteristics of an absolutely beautiful fairy. With a soul-stirring and attractive charm, she only needed to stand in front of men without moving or speaking at all to fill men with desire. An unrestrained desire would fill their hearts and loins as men drank in her sight like the finest alcohol. All they would want would be to jump her fiercely, pressing her below them and conquering her. This matriarch of the Dark Elves, Adele, was undoubtedly an extremely pretty, coquettish and dangerous beauty. Just a glimpse of her smile was seduction of the highest quality, capable of causing people to become unconsciously obsessed, willingly falling into oblivion for eternity. Lightly sighing with deep feeling, Adele walked next to Saikon, attired in a purple dress that hugged her curves. Deep emotions seemed to burst out of her chest as she said helplessly, "How could I bear to kill you? Over the endless years there were only a couple of you that accompanied me, allowing me to feel a hint of joy while imprisoned within this dark underworld. But although none of you were talented, handsome youths, you should still amount to more by now. After all, you've lived for such a long time, such an endless number of years, so how could you still not have attained even a wee bit of additional courage?" Becoming increasingly timid instead, Saikong only trembled slightly while his body lay immersed within a pool of blood. He seemed to be seriously listening to Adele's lecture without a word. Adele shot a glance at Saikong lying next to her leg and curled within a pool of blood. She sighed once more, expressing her exasperation with their failures. She suddenly raised her head towards the huge brownish red mountain in front of her and yelled towards the lizardman's dwelling place, "Hey necromancer, let's both come out and have a chat." The shouts seemed to have formed through the convergence of 1,000 sound waves. Unexpectedly it directly passed through the intricate and sophisticated mountain holes, descending right into the mountain's core. Even if Adele hadn't deliberately used her mental strength to amplify her voice, Han Sha-O would still have heard Adele's yell through his two mystical demons constantly watching her. After Adele finished speaking in the common language of the humans, she once again yelled in the language of the elves. The Dark Elves, originally doing their best to infiltrate the lizardman's cave, suddenly withdrew like a current of water. In an amazingly short period, the Dark Elves managed to reorganize themselves outside. When Han Sha-O saw all the Dark Elves withdrawing through the mystical demons, he realized that it was definitely due to Adele's command. Knitting his brows, he hesitated for a moment before calmly walking out of the cave. Only he didn't go too far from the cave. After Han Sha-O left the cave, several lizardmen that were currently tracking Han Sha-O quickly reported his movements to the leader of the lizardmen. After the leader learned of this news, he told the lizardmen to follow him outside. When Han Sha-O was standing not too far from Adele, the lizardman leader arrived behind Han Sha-O with his people. When Han Sha-O walked out from within the cave, he only caught a glimpse at the Dark Elf matriarch Adele before being immediately taken aback. However, Adele's beautiful face that could make all living things go crazy only made Han Sha-O astonished for a moment. Han Sha-O's willpower had been tempered too often for this sort of trick to work. His expression remained natural as he spoke, "Well, I've come, so what do you want to chat with me about?" "Hee, that big lizard. It left already, right?" Adele smiled sweetly as the surrounding young Dark Elves obviously swallowed their saliva. Unexpectedly, Han Sha-O nodded with a smile, not hiding the truth. "Correct, he has indeed already left this place. I can't say when he'll be back, but even if he doesn't come back anytime soon, I will still help these lizardmen people. If you have any intentions of enslaving the lizardmen people, then we can continue to play." Adele had likely decided to cause a commotion today after constant probes up until now. They had even discovered that Degassi had left. Thus, Adele was most likely feeling confident attacking today. However, since Han Sha-O has entered the underground world, he would naturally try his utmost to help the lizardmen people deal with the Dark Elves' encroachment. He would also not need to rely on a vague light to preserve the lizardmen's safety at all. Adele started unceasingly laughing, causing Han Sha-o's heart to undulate. She amusingly sized up Han Sha-o, saying, "Continue to play? Now that the big lizard has left, are you capable of stopping me all alone?" "Who knows?" Han Sha-o calmly said, while the corner of his mouth evoked a pondering smile as he looked at Adele and said, "Do you want to test me?" "It's only natural that I would want to test you. After all, you were able to force Saikon to withdraw. This clearly indicates that you're definitely out of the ordinary." "Only young man, how young are you?" "I believe considering your human age, no matter how strong you still must have a limit. I also don't believe you can obstruct our march to conquer the underground world." Adele tactfully smiled, brimming with confidence. Shrugging his shoulders, Han Sha-o said, "Then we have nothing to chat about. How do you want to play?" "No matter what kind of method you want to use, I'm willing to accompany you." If it's body on body combat, I would welcome it even more, haha. Even if the lizardman leader's people as well as countless undead creatures were behind him, Han Sha-o was not completely assured of victory facing this Adele. After all, just Adele's personal strength was enough to keep him busy, and the couple of pretty handsome and obedient dark elves who had lived for so long also had strength that couldn't be belittled. Additionally, they had even brought approximately 10,000 dark elf experts. However, Han Sha-o did not believe that Adele would fight him to the death to defeat the lizardman people. Thus, he had no fear as he threatened Adele, even going as far as leering at her. Chapter 367, Burying the hatchet in each other's flesh. Body on body combat in bed. Adele suddenly smiled enchantingly, her delicate beautiful body trembling as she gazed at Han Sha-o with limpid eyes. Her eyes were like a pool of spring water, as if wanting to draw Han Sha-o deep into its depths with its beautiful scenery. The dark elves were a race that were naturally lascivious in nature, just like the dark dragons. This was especially the case for female dark elves, where 7 out of 10 of them were harlots. Adele, flirtatious and charming to no end, was evidently a well-known figure. The few dark elf elders by her side ought to have also taken their turn as her bedwarmer. She was unabashed whilst speaking of such matters in front of so many subordinates. Instead, she was actively engaged, seemingly willing to put aside the dignity of her position to immediately engage Han Sha-o in carefree, uninhibited grinding. Hey, the madam's outstanding beauty enchants everyone. If you are truly interested in this aspect, I will definitely do my utmost to accompany you. Han Sha-o also felt his heart itch when he saw Adele's enchanting smile. Adele was obviously a ravenous wanton woman, seemingly born seductive. On the other hand, Han Sha-o had never been a sanctimonious knight, barely concealing the desire that existed in his heart. Adele couldn't help but give Han Sha-o another once-over after his response. The tall and imposing Han Sha-o was like a javelin as he stood there, giving off an overbearing might. His handsome yet dispassionate looks, his imposing height, and a body covered in violent and explosive muscles weren't things the beautiful but thin dark elves by her side could compare to. The more Adele looked at Han Sha-o, the faster her heart beat. Her rosy small tongue subconsciously licked her brilliant red lips, her delicate peach-colored face flushing red as if she were intoxicated, flirtingly enticing. There were gulping sounds from the dark elves who watched Adele from the side, including a few female dark elves who had special urges. They really would have directly rushed to embrace Adele if not for the misgivings that rose from her strength and prestige. "Little fellow, you are truly an interesting human." Although the humans I've seen all contained naked lust in their hearts, all of them acted as decently as they could on the surface, but transformed into savage beasts once they got into bed. You are different from them. Even in front of so many people, you actually don't bother concealing your desire at all. This is truly unexpected. Adele softly and slowly mused out loud as she smiled and gazed at Han Sha-o. Han Sha-o bowed courteously in response to Adele's praise before looking at her with a smile. Although he didn't reply, an imposing manner that didn't fear any threats naturally radiated outward. If you have it in you to make me acknowledge your strength, I'll certainly accompany you in a battle in bed. Adele slowly walked toward Han Sha-o as she finished her sentence, smiling seductively as she said, "It is now time for you to prove your strength." Han Sha-o remained silent before retrieving the skeleton staff from his space ring. He then said to Adele, "I hope I can satisfy you." Hey, honestly speaking, I'm certainly very very interested in you." Adele was just about to answer when she noticed the skeleton staff in Han Sha-o's hands. Her expression changed as she carefully looked at Han Sha-o's staff a few more times. Only then did she ask, a hint of horror in her voice, "The skeleton staff? You're from the Calamity Church?" Han Sha-o was shocked as he looked at the skeleton staff that was tightly grasped in his hand. He thought quickly, why do all the older fellows in this world seem to recognize the skeleton staff? Since Adele immediately thought of Calamity Church when she saw the skeleton staff, it seemed that she had not lived for that long, at least not as long as ancient Lizard King Dagasi. When did the Calamity Church's influence reach the underground world? What is your relationship with the lizardmen? Could it be that you want to protect these stupid lizardmen? Adele chattered on without waiting for Han Sha-o to reply. Seeing Han Sha-o remain silent, Adele furiously continued, "Forget it. If you insist on protecting these lizardmen, I will show you some face." However, the underground world is our territory. If you're thinking of conquering the underground world, the Dark Elves will definitely resist to our deaths. Hearing Adele's impassioned speech, Han Sha-o, who'd originally ready to fight around with Adele, suddenly froze. Han Sha-o understood from Adele's tone that she did not fear him but clearly feared the Calamity Church. She did not dare to make a move against the lizardmen due to Han Sha-o being someone from the Calamity Church. The Calamity Church was a sinister existence throughout the whole profound continent that incited terror just by their name. The Dark Elves, who were similarly considered evil, naturally knew of Calamity Church's formidable prowess. Among the sinister powers and evil races in the profound continent, the Calamity Church was without question the #1 most evil power. Even for someone like Adele, once she saw Han Sha-o holding the skeleton staff, she immediately admitted defeat and renounced enslaving the lizardmen without Han Sha-o even saying a word. There was a period of time in which the skeleton staff was synonymous with the Calamity Church. The one who wielded the skeleton staff was absolutely one of the top figures in the Calamity Church. When Adele saw the skeleton staff appear in Han Sha-o's hand, she did not have any doubts treating Han Sha-o as a high-ranking figure of the Calamity Church. She immediately extinguished any intention of becoming enemies with Han Sha-o. An evil power like the Dark Elves did not fear any country in the continent. These countries normally would not set foot in the underground world. In addition, a country's strength was limited. Hence, Adele did not fear them even if they really set foot in the underground world. However, the infamous Calamity Church's viciousness and persistence toward their enemies would cause any party to be terrified. Even if someone was in the underground world when they provoked the Calamity Church, they would also be faced with a never-ending fearsome retaliation. Adele had just returned from the layer below. She definitely did not want to immediately offend the #1 most evil power in the world. Hence, she voluntarily conceded in front Han Sha-o. A flurry of ideas passed through Han Sha-o's mind. The Calamity Church's identity was indeed worth of being the profound continent's most feared evil power if just mentioning its name unexpectedly led to experts like Adele admitting defeat. He reacted quickly to Adele's words. "Since you recognize the skeleton staff, you obviously know my identity." Hey, the lizardman's true god Dagasi has close ties with the Calamity Church. Perhaps you do not know that Dagasi has already left this place and would not threaten the Dark Elves. However, Dagasi had requested that the Calamity Church would take care of the lizardmen when he left. Therefore we will not let the lizardmen be enslaved by the Dark Elves. The Calamity Church does not have unfriendly intentions toward the underground world's Dark Elves. In fact, we have all been invaded by the light side and should not be fighting internally. If you could give the Calamity Church face and not cause trouble for the lizardmen, I believe this will end as a very pleasant encounter. Han Sha-o portrayed the image of a high-ranking figure in the Calamity Church, speaking proudly yet respectfully to the Dark Elves' ancestor Adele. "Of course, since the lizardmen are under your protection, the Dark Elves will not attack them from now on." Adele didn't hesitate, giggling as she replied, "Distinguished friend, since you have come to the underground world, you definitely must come be our guest in our Dark Elf territory." As expected, Adele immediately agreed to Han Sha-o's request. She then giggled as she sincerely proposed an invitation. Adele even cast a soul-wrenching coquettish glance Han Shao-oh's way as she made the proposal. Han Shao felt an unbearable itch from the blatant seduction. End of part 1 of the chapter. Even war was avoided at this point. Simply due to the skeleton staff in his hand, Han Shao had extinguished Adele's ideas for enslaving the lizardmen and even had her sincerely invite Han Shao in an attempt to build a favorable relationship. Han Shao did not expect this, and the outcome was obviously more ideal than he could have imagined. Han Shao turned around to look at the lizardmen's leader, grinning as he said, "I'll be making a trip. I believe the Dark Elves will leave you alone in the future." Within the underground world, the slow-witted lizardmen were not as well informed as the Dark Elves. The lizardman leader had never heard of the existence of the Calamity Church. However, he understood from Adele's words that Han Shao hailed from an outstanding power, and this power was dreaded by even the Dark Elves, touted as the strongest in the Slayer. The Dark Elves were already the Slayer's strongest race to begin with. Now that they had renounced their internal conflicts and gathered together, this strength had reached extraordinary levels. In addition, they now even had a mysterious group of experts. The lizardmen's leader understood that if they were to fight to the end against the Dark Elves, it would only lead to their deaths. Now that he saw Adele had taken the initiative to let them go, the lizardman leader nationally did not foolishly say anything and only bowed respectfully toward Han Shao, saying, "Thank you, Sir Envoy." Han Shao nodded as he left with Adele, who had been smiling enchantingly by the side. They began to make their way to Dark Elf territory. The territory occupied by the Dark Elves was the most vast and fertile in this layer of the underground world. Han Shao continued to make light conversation with Adele as they traveled. Evidently Adele was extremely curious about Han Shao's identity. Along the way, she continuously probed for clues about Han Shao's true status in the Calamity Church. However, Han Shao constantly evaded her probing, not revealing the slightest bit of information. Truthfully, Han Shao was unable to divulge any secrets even if he wanted to, as he wasn't familiar with the Calamity Church or their internal structure. However, Adele had closely examined the skeleton staff once Han Shao had brought it out and had felt the bizarre strength it contained. Hence, she didn't suspect Han Shao's identity at all. The more ambiguously Han Shao spoke, the more Adele felt that Han Shao possessed an extremely high-ranking position in the Calamity Church. For Han Shao to already be wielding the skeleton staff at such a young age, it already sufficiently illustrated that he wasn't a simple character. The merrily beaming Adele didn't forget to try and seduce Han Shao on their way back. She didn't sit in the purple light veil tent, but instead walked alongside Han Shao, swaying her hips and sashaying her butt enticingly with every step. From time to time, Adele would inadvertently brush up against Han Shao, the sides of her beautiful legs coming into contact with him again and again. This caused Han Shao to be unceasingly aroused throughout the whole journey, his lust rising rapidly. Adele was clearly very apprehensive of the Calamity Church and was full of reverence toward Han Shao. When she discovered that Han Shao wasn't willing to reveal his identity, Adele didn't continue to probe further and instead introduced the scenery along the way to him. The underground world wasn't as dank and wet as rumored. Although it was truly an eternal night, the ceiling thousands of meters above the underground world sparkled with strange light. Furthermore, plants that glistened grew everywhere, causing many places in the underground world to be as fully light as a brightly lit day outside. Similar to the world above, the underground world had its own mountains and streams, so much so that the beautiful scenery in those places was even more magnificent than those above ground. The coquettish Adele was someone who also indulged in beautiful landscapes. She wasn't at all in a hurry to return and had simply ordered a portion of the group to return first. She then personally led a few hundred experts on a detour with Han Shao, showing him various exotic landscapes. The Dark Elves were the overlords of the Slayer of the underground world. Adele had absolute confidence in her own strength and believed that there were many living creatures that could threaten her in this lair. The Bateman and Earth Goblins they ran into along the way all went into hiding when they saw Adele's group, as though hiding from a demon. They seemed extremely afraid of Adele. Adele finally brought Han Shao to her Dark Elf territory after visiting 12 spectacular scenic locations in the underground world. The Dark Elf territory was a vast patch of forest where all kinds of bizarre plants grew. Dozens of towering trees grew tall, vibrant with life. The abundant, enchanting emerald presence of life nourished a forest that seemed to be brimming with vitality. The way forward was filled with all kinds of verdant and thick plants with just a hint of evil in in their presence. There were many beautiful demonic spider webs that stretched across the trees that seemed to reach for the sky. Within these spider webs were crystals of various colors that seemed to be using the network of webs to absorb the forest's energy. There were also many small red, purple and black spiders that actively moved about the forest. They had friendly dealings with the dark elves and served as their defensive scouts. When the spiders saw Adele appear, they danced elegantly on top of the ancient trees, appearing to be narrating something to Adele. The evil goddess Rose, worshipped by the dark elves, was rumored to have the head of a human but the body of a spider. Han Shao did not know the truth of this matter, but based on the situation he saw, there may be some truth to the rumors. Adele could obviously communicate with the small spiders, ordering them to work for her. The further in they went, the more lush and tall the various ancient trees were. There were many wooden houses located in the center of the forest, brimming with natural energy. Some of the houses were formed from woven branches, while many tall houses were previously ancient trees that reached the skies but had since died and withered. These ancient trees formed a simple yet gorgeous palace when they were hollowed out, appearing extremely exotic. The dark elves had an innate fondness toward fine objects. Their palace buildings boasted delicate patterns carefully carved into the outside trunk. These patterns served no other purpose and were purely for aesthetics. Many dark elves were very accomplished in the arts, and every magic weapon they made were incomparably refined. Although the dark elves' magic weapons might not be the best in the continent, they were definitely the most beautiful and refined. Along the way, Han Shao recognized the dark elves' pursuit of artistic excellence above everything else. From the buildings, armor, clothes to even food and religious offerings, every object or activity had to be artistically beautiful. This is the dark elves' most important territory in the underground world. As the matriarch of the dark elves, I am honored to have brought you here. Adele smiled sweetly as she directly brought Han Shao toward the interior. All the dark elves in the area respectfully bowed in greeting when they saw Adele approach. Adele possessed an extremely prestigious position among the dark elves, as she was able to communicate with the evil goddess Rose. Her status was similar to Han Shao's position among the lizardmen, both appearing as their respective god's messenger. However, as Adele was also a dark elf, her position among the dark elves was even higher. That the constantly warring dark elves could unite together after her appearance was testament to her vaunted position. Madam is too kind. I instead should be honored to be able to be here. Han Shao grinned as he answered. Adele led Han Shao to a wooden palace that had previously been an enormous ancient tree. After entering, Han Shao discovered that the floor was covered with carpets embroidered with complicated patterns, and the surrounding wooden walls had the strange image of the evil goddess Rose, portrayed as a half-human, half-spider. Many suspended crystal chandeliers glittered with bright, gorgeous radiance, imparting the place with a natural splendor. At this moment, Adele clapped her hands, and 5 alluring female dark elves, all with different skin colors but equally beautiful, suddenly walked out. These 5 dark elves wore thin yarn skirts. Their expressions were either shy, provocative, or pure, with all their gazes focused on Han Shao. By Adele's side, properly attend to our distinguished guest. Adele smiled faintly, giving her orders to the 5 beautiful and seductive dark elves. The 5 young female dark elves walked together toward Han Shao, all of them carrying fruit plates and wine glasses, lightly smiling with unique expressions as they headed over. Chapter 368, Going on a punitive expedition. This banquet was no different than the ones at home. Served by the 5 young pretty dark elves, Han Shao drank fine wine and ate tender meat in extreme comfort. As per Adele's command, the 5 young dark elves wore revealing clothing and smiled sweetly as they plied Han Shao with more wine. Intentionally or not, the elves lightly brushed their bodies with Han Shao, setting his lust aflame. As Han Shao seemed to be fallen to an intoxicated haze, Adele meaningfully glanced at the couple of dark elf elders who had been smiling obsequiously since the start. Adele's lovers withdrew themselves from the room with smiles on their face. After the elders left, Adele gave another meaningful look towards the 5 dark elves that served Han Shao. All 5 of the dark elves were equally beautiful and began to undress in front of Han Shao. They then slid into his arms as they smiled charmingly at him. Ha, honorable guest, enjoy these beauties. If you feel like these 5 girls are still unable to satisfy you, then I will willingly serve you. Adele smiled enchantingly toward Han Sha-oh as she took the initiative to depart. How about all of you simply come at me together then? Han Sha-oh let his hands rove unabashedly over the dark elves who had just jumped into his arms while inviting Adele with a smile. Adele rebuked him with a light laugh. How will that do? I am the matriarch of the dark elves and I definitely can't serve you alongside them. I am actually better than all 5 of them alone, so only if you can satisfy all 5 of them can you possibly let me feel satisfied. However, you need to show me some proof first. After saying these words, Adele did not remain any longer. As she looked at Han Sha-oh start making moves on the 5 young dark elves without restraint, she endured the restlessness in her heart and left gently chuckling. The instant Adele left Han Sha-oh unrestrainedly pinned down a mostly naked and delicate dark elf who'd been in his arms, a long and hearty laugh sounded as he began a punitive expedition to conquer their bodies. The 12 mystical demons silently left Han Sha-oh's body spreading out to cover the dark elves' territory. 2 of the 12 mystical demons were ordered to follow Adele and determine the purpose of her departure. As the full-bodied girl under his body tactfully begged for forgiveness in a sweet and soft voice, Han Sha-oh reached out a hand to pull over another girl. This dark elf possessed a purple skin tone body and long dark purple hair. He couldn't help but grope her own well-rounded breasts as she gazed at him blushingly. She was just like a blooming purple rose. Failing to repress her innermost desires, the dark elf under Han Sha-oh's body instantly started shouting in a joyous and high-spirited manner. The trembling and unrepressed shout was akin to a melodious and enchanting song that could dissolve a person's heart. As the other 3 dark elves flushed with excitement, they began to tangle together with a wordless croon. The dark elves were known for their lasciviousness, the female dark elves especially so. As the 3 dark elves started to walk toward Han Sha-oh, 2 of them had a bashful expression. The other appeared somewhat aloof, emitting a different kind of charm. However, when they truly started battling with their bodies, the originally shy and blushing dark elves actually started gradually becoming wild and uninhibited. Before Han Sha-oh had even truly overwhelmed them with ecstasy, they had actually already became wild themselves. As Han Sha-oh continued his punitive expedition on the dark elf under his body, he saw Adele through the mystical demon's gaze arriving within a luxurious room 2 floors below. Sai Kong and those few male dark elves were waiting there. Besides them was also a young male elf. The joyous and extremely spirited clamor from Han Sha-oh's room constantly entered this meeting room. Adele's face was a stunning crimson as she looked like a worm was writhing in her heart. Her visage expressed her great desire to immediately replace the woman under Han Sha-oh's body. Subconsciously licking her red lips slightly once more, Adele forcefully repressed the restlessness in her heart before asking Sai Kong, "Tell me what occurred in the battle between the 2 of you again." Sai Kong was still deeply wounded, blood marring his arms and face. With a deep breath, he quickly summarized the confrontation between him and Han Sha-oh in a soft voice. After he was done, he also added, "Besides the intense smell of a necromancer on his body, he also cultivates an incredible fighting aura." "Oh, that's not right. It doesn't seem very much like a fighting aura since it's so suffused with evil." "It's highly likely that he's a high-ranking member of the Calamity Church." "Of course, you imbecile, as if I needed your warning." Being able to hold a magical stuff with human skulls already clearly shows his identity. "The only thing I don't understand is that big lizard's actions. Why would it make such a shady transaction with the Calamity Church? This is truly odd." The devastatingly beautiful Adele's eyebrows creased as she voiced her doubts. "Matriarch, do we still need to deal with the lizardman? This person's age is still young, so he's definitely not a match for you. Now that he's entered our domain, should we take advantage of the situation and be rid of him?" A different dark elf elder piped up. "You fool. Since he dared to enter our domain, he's definitely confident in his ability to leave. Let alone leave, he surely has a way to send out information." "You fools, can't you use your brains?" Adele snapped. Adele shot a glance at the only young dark elf here after scolding them. Her voice tinkled with a laugh as she tenderly said, "Young child, I heard you met this human before when following Dana." In response to the matriarch, "This person has come to the underground world once previously. He started off helping us deal with a young dark dragon. However, because Chief Dana targeted him wanting to capture everything in one fell swoop, he somehow betrayed us and left more than half of us dead. In the end he even stole the eternal Sigh of Darkness one and made that dark dragon his magical pet. This young dark elf respectfully reported. Adele started and hastily inquired what? The eternal Sigh of Darkness is in his hands? Nodding, the dark elf replied, yes matriarch, he stole it from the hands of Chief Dana. Last time when we went to deal with the lizardman, that big lizard crushed Chief Dana to death. A lot of us saw him then too. I'm sure it's him. Dark dragon, he made a young dark dragon his magical pet. Elder Saikong muttered to himself before suddenly saying in astonishment, matriarch, that dark dragon wouldn't be Gilbert the son of Gilges, the head of the dark dragons, would it? When we left the underground world we promised Gilges, that old bastard, that we would be responsible for finding his son. When she heard Saikong's words, Adele's expression changed. That's very likely. That young lewd dragon and this Brian have similar temperaments. They're probably running together. If that's indeed the case, we definitely must not move against him now. This person is not someone we can provoke. Matriarch, then what do we do? Are we going to just let the lizardman go? The young dark elf hastily spoke, seeming to have a deeply rooted hatred for the lizardman. Adele shot a glance at the young dark elf and responded, and just how important are the lizardmen? This underground world houses so many races and they are by no means crucial. Besides occupying a few minds, they have no other accomplishments. The present situation will not change whether or not we provoke them. However, if we can strike a good relationship with this Calamity Church fellow, perhaps we will be able to return to the world above and forcefully reclaim the fertile lands of the damned forest elves. The young dark elf was pleasantly surprised to hear those words. We can actually return to the world above and even take back everything that belonged to us from the hands of the forest elves? In this world there is no such thing as impossible, Adele confidently said. As Adele and several dark elf elders spoke, their ears had been constantly taking in the unrestrained moans from above. But when their conversation reached this point, the sounds from above suddenly started gradually calming down. It quickly dwindled into silence and not a single dark female elf's voice sound. As Adele knitted her brows to listen for a moment, she suddenly couldn't help but feel alarmed. She noticed that not even one of her subordinates had come down. All 5 of those dark elves were actually from a group within the dark elf race that were the most skilled at sex and the most in need of vigor. Their lasciviousness wouldn't topple even after going through 10 guys in a night. According to Adele's instructions, after they dealt with Han Shao, they would send a signal to inform her. However, from the present situation it seemed that the elves had already submitted. Not a single one of the 5 harlots had sent a signal or continued to make any noise. Why is there no more noise? An elder asked suspiciously. He's probably finally incapable of continuing. To be able to last so long, it seems like this human actually has some tricks indeed, another elder replied. Adele shot a glance at the 2 elves and lightly humped before saying, you think everyone is useless like all of you? Hey, can one human be capable of subduing those 5 sluts in such a short time? One elder sneered. You're right. Adele disdainfully shot a glance at him before muttering, do I actually have to personally take the field? Adele's body started growing hot from head to toe after speaking, her cheeks turning an alluring blood red. Without taking another look at the couple of male dark elves here, she twisted her waist excitedly, swaying her buttocks to and fro as she walked upwards. When Adele finally arrived, she saw Han Shao's completely naked body casually sitting on top of a chair, a smile on his face as he gazed at the restless Adele, burning in flames of passion. At Han Shao's feet 5 wanton dark elves lay on top of a rug like 5 balls of cotton. They seemed to lack the strength to even raise their fingers in greeting. Adele merely shot a glance at Han Shao's spirited and fierce thing on his lower body before suddenly feeling a tremble in her heart. Then, looking at the scene that had become a mess, the throbbing in her heart became increasingly intense and she was sure that the sound of her thumping heart was echoing across the room. I've been waiting for you all along. Han Shao smilingly looked at Adele as he opened both of his hands in an inviting manner. How about coming here, my lady? Adele suddenly emitted a moving moan as the clothing on her body drifted towards the ground like pieces of a feather. She unreservedly displayed a perfect naked body that was ravishingly beautiful out in the open. Then, like a moth flying into flames, her plump butt directly fell on top of Han Shao, who sat upright on a chair. Han Shao and Adele simultaneously emitted a loud moaning sound that brimmed with endless joy and satisfaction. In the room that Adele had left, the male dark elves left were discussing things, seemingly disbelieving the words Adele said before she left. However, After Adele's prolonged moan traveled into the room, the faces of each and every one of the male dark elves became extremely unsightly. From the moment her voice rang out, it signified that her judgment was correct. That Han Shuo had indeed conquered the 5 dark elves in a very short time frame and had now started his expedition on matriarch Adele. Some human males were indeed stronger than dark elves in this field. However, the ability of female dark elves in this field was also very well known throughout the profound continent. Even if an unusually endowed and gifted human male confronted a female dark elf, they wouldn't have any advantages whatsoever. Those first 5 wanton dark elves were actually well-known figures among the dark elves, but who would have expected that Han Shuo would deal with them with ease? Now that Adele had personally taken the field, the previously disdainful words that she said to them became fact. This seemed to resemble a slap to a face and cause their self-respect in this matter to suffer an enormous humiliation. What a frightening fellow. Seems like only the matriarch can make him succumb, Sai Kong said towards the few people beside him as the blood on his face gradually faded away. The other people had a noticeably envious look. However, after Sai Kong's words, they also all nodded and said naturally. Sai Kong and the others were originally Adele's lovers. This was a normal situation within the Dark Elf race, but even with all of them together they still weren't a match for Adele. Perhaps because they knew how frightening Adele was in this respect, they were constantly afraid of Adele deep in their hearts and were unable to raise their heads. As Sai Kong and the others resumed their discussion, another prolonged moan came from Adele above. The complexion of the 5 elders changed greatly after hearing this. Sai Kong couldn't help but to cry out in alarm, first saying, "How is that possible?" The others also had faces filled with incredulity. Each and every one of them looked at each other with dismay, not knowing what to do. From that prolonged moan they could obviously recognize that Adele had climaxed. But without waiting for the 5 dark elves to react, Adele suddenly emitted another extremely carefree moan and let out a shrieking no. The 5 black elves were once again stupefied. Amongst them Sai Kong was aghast. "He's still going? Can it be that even the matriarch is also unable to continue?" "Impossible. Even if the matriarch climaxes, she still shouldn't say the word no. Perhaps she's purposefully putting on an act. You all should know that the more weakly a woman resists, the more likely a male will orgasm torrentially and delightfully." Among them a dark elf elder thought for a moment before analyzing with great pomp. The other dark elves immediately reacted. Amongst them Sai Kong drew many inferences and suddenly said in realization, "The matriarch is truly powerful. It seems like her recent moaning sound is just to confuse this terrifying human." "That must be so. What kind of person is the matriarch? As if such a young and vigorous fellow is capable of conquering our matriarch. We seem to have overthought the situation. It seems like the matriarch has once again earned herself another servant between her legs." As the couple of dark elf elders discussed and believed themselves to be infallible, Adele's panic-stricken voice became louder and louder above them. An unceasing shrieking sound started. "No, don't do this, I beg you. The matriarch's act is so genuine. It seems like he will soon be done for." Sai Kong continued to voice his opinion. "Ah, damned Sai Kong, hurry and save me, save me." Suddenly, after Adele's wretched and mournful howling, she unexpectedly started shouting for assistance. Sai Kong leapt up with fright and spoke stunned. "Did you hear that clearly?" Exclamation mark. "The matriarch is shouting for me to save her. Could something have truly happened?" "Ah, just kill me, you demon, just kill me!" From above Adele screamed frantically without a hint of joy at all. The dark elf elders finally started reacting at this time, suddenly realizing that a very major incident must have happened above. They rushed out of the meeting room with a shout as they hastily made their way upstairs. They barged into the room and gaped at the sight that greeted them. Adele was firmly pressed down on top of the chair and was being vigorously pounded from behind. But that wasn't what transfixed them. Adele's body seemed to visibly age, as if the wheel of time had quickened by 1,000 times. Her long hair on her head gradually started becoming gray. Following this change, Adele's powerful aura also began to slowly flow into Han Shuo's body, causing his originally mellow aura to start to soaring unceasingly. "Hey, you guys came!" Han Shuo's big arm firmly pinned down Adele as he continued his punitive expedition. Turning his head towards the couple of dark elf elders, his smirk seemed to turn into a somewhat truthless smile. "Let go of our matriarch matriarch, otherwise we will kill you. Saikon hissed severely as he pulled out the crystal ball he'd used previously. I'm almost ready, just wait a moment. Han Sha laughed as he started pounding in an increasingly fierce manner. Soon after, he began exerting himself with a burst of speed right in front of the dark elf elders. He flung his head back, howling loudly with elation as his body began to uncontrollably tremble for a short burst. As he finished, he took another look at the dark elf matriarch Adele. At that moment, the ravishingly beautiful Madame Adele, whose looks could fell cities and topple empires, had become a gray-haired, loose-skinned dark elf granny. Her skin didn't have the slightest luster of life to it. It was clear she would never again regain her youthful radiance. From his space ring, Han Sha-Oh cheerfully and happily took out another shirt and put it on. Han Sha-Oh, having just absorbed all of the power of Adele's body, only felt an unprecedented contentment as he faced the several dark elf elders with a smile. Adele's dead. You guys should all go die too. Chapter 369. Traitors. Adele's death, coupled with Han Sha-Oh's ruthless words, sent chills over the dark elf elders. Especially Saikong, who had personally fought Han Sha-Oh, was deeply affected. Saikong, who'd been the first to suggest coming here, didn't feel the slightest desire for revenge upon seeing Adele's corpse. He actually shrank back as a fearful look crossed his face. What do you want? Han Sha-Oh laughed and grinned as he said, I want your deaths, of course. You also gain no benefit if we die, and you might not even be able to defeat the five of us. Saikong opened his mouth again, his expression becoming slightly calmer. Let's negotiate. It was at this time that the naked elf girls lying on the carpet slowly woke up groggily. Upon seeing the situation, they panicked and ran to the elders, screaming, Elders, save us. The dark elf elders were unsure of what to do when they saw the five naked bodies running towards them. They didn't have much time to think, however, as the five elf girls all ran into the embrace of various elders. Still wearing an expression of fear, they gabbled, we're scared. Let's leave this place. PFFT. Saikong stared in disbelief at the delicate dagger protruding from his stomach, then stared with disbelief at the squirming girls in his embrace. However, their faces no longer held any trace of fear now, but instead wore expressions of indifference. The other elders met the same fate as Saikong. Each of the elf girls that had barreled into their embrace had struck a fatal blow with daggers into each of their chests, all with cold, vicious expressions on their faces. Trying to kill you folks in your own territory wasn't easy. Hey, but it seems the people who want you dead are your own people. Han Sha-Oh explained with a smile, coldly watching Saikong fall into a puddle of his own blood. Why? Saikong asked the dark elf girl, unable to accept the situation. Why did you old bastards come up from down below? All of the races were doing just fine until you came and stole our spots, becoming our slavers. Kiki, every race has them, not to mention us dark elves. As long as you die, then we'll become the true holders of power amongst the dark elves. The dark elf girl coldly smiled. She squatted and grasped the dagger tightly, shoving it even farther in. Saikong's eyes widened and went glassy, never to see again. All of the dark elf elders were extraordinary magic users. However, they would have never thought that their own subordinates would act against them, and immediately fell victim to the dark elf girl's covert ambush. Emitting a small sound of inquiry, Han Sha-Oh flew towards one of the dark elf elders like lightning. One of the elders had just struggled to his feet from a puddle of his own blood when Han Sha-Oh placed his palm on the elder's back. An explosive sound rang out from within the elder's body. This elder, who had not fallen in the sneak attack, was finally dead for good. Having made preparations for hand-to-hand combat with Han Sha-Oh, Adele had not posted any dark elf sentries nearby. Knowing that she would likely be loud, she would likely not want her subordinates to hear her, as she was the main wielder of political power amongst the dark elves. As a result, she had dismissed her bodyguards. This made it so that even after the battle had finished, there were still no sentries who were aware of the earth-shaking situation that had occurred. They were still busily going about their own business in the distance. Didn't you say you'll work with us? Why did you still kill Adele in the end? A dark elf girl named Shylin asked Han Sha-Oh with puzzlement as she wiped her blood-stained arm on the carpet, putting on her gauze-thin clothes. After Han Sha-Oh's display of strength from pushing all five of them down in such a short time, Shylin and the rest had made a proposal to Han Sha-Oh, hoping that Han Sha-Oh would help kill Adele and the elders. However, They were tactfully declined by Han Shao. Shrugging, Han Shao said with resignation, Adele acted against me, so I suddenly changed my mind. When Han Shao said these words, he sighed lightly. There seemed to be several red strands moving around in his body. 2 black dots were being seemingly harried by the red strands into the palm of his hand. The skin of Han Shao's palm suddenly burst open and 2 blue spiders the size of beans emerged. 2 balls of flame materialized in Han Shao's palms, turning the 2 blue spiders into ashes. Han Shao blew and the ashes vanished in the air. Han Shao originally hadn't intended to act against Adele. However, it had become apparent that Adele was conspiring against him. With Han Shao's level of power, it was utter simplicity to discover any oddities within his body. Judging by Adele's use of 2 spiders to infiltrate Han Shao's body, it was obvious that she didn't have any good intentions. These 2 spiders were implanted into Han Shao's body when he and Adele had been kissing passionately. He hadn't even felt them in the heat of the moment. Had Han Shao not been as powerful as he was, he never would have known that Adele was acting against him. With Han Shao's temperament, he wouldn't hold any kind feelings towards Adele since she made the first move. During their fierce body-on-body combat, Han Shao suddenly used the demonic secret technique to absorb Adele's energy, taking Yin to replenish Yang. Adele was a strange dark mage and also had a strange energy in her body. This energy was completely different from the other forms of energy Han Shao was familiar with, containing some sort of evil wanton power. Han Shao had detected a trace of evil divine power within the energy and assumed that it must have come from the evil goddess Rose. It was precisely because Adele's body contained this kind of depraved evil power that she was so powerful as a mere dark archmage. She'd resisted madly when he was draining her yin, but she only had the power of a mage. When faced with Han Shao, whose physical body was as tyrannical as a magical beast, her struggling was futile. When using the demonic technique to drain Adele's energy, most of the absorbed energy had been from the dark goddess Rose. After filtering out the impurities, only 1/5 of the original amount was left. However, even this small amount of energy nourished Han Shao's magical yuan. The demon infant in his body was gaining more and more sentience, loosening Han Shao's inhibitions. As for Adele's mental strength, it wasn't something that the secret technique could harvest. Unfortunately for her, under Han Shao's relentless soul tremor spells, it was impossible for her to focus enough to concentrate her mental strength to attack him. It seems that the strength in my heart has been getting stronger recently. Could it be that I'm on the verge of a breakthrough to the carnal realm? Han Shao suddenly began to doubt his progress. Recently he had been feeling the strong urge to subdue every pretty girl he came across. Even towards enemies, Han Shao had the urge to behead them, with wild thoughts of massacres and other brutality oozing their way into his thoughts. Shaking his head, Han Shao temporarily dispelled those thoughts from his head. Glancing at the 5 elf girls who had finished dressing themselves and were standing in front of him, he said, "All right, these old bastards who were preventing you from taking power are all dead. Now can we talk about matters relating to us?" Shilin nodded her head and said, "Leave the rest to us. We'll give you 500,000 gold coins as long as you give us the eternal sigh of darkness. We'll also promise not to disturb the lizardmen. What do you say?" "No problem," Han Shao readily agreed, taking the bow he'd acquired from Dana. "It's useless in my hands anyway. It's a very good deal for me to exchange this for 500,000 gold coins." Adele and the Dark Elf elders weren't carrying anything that was of interest to Han Shao. Perhaps it was due to the fact that they had just arrived from the layer below, but they lacked the opportunity to collect any wealth, meaning that Han Shao couldn't loot any satisfactory war spoils off them. In addition, we agree to establish long-term agreements. Here in the underground world we have many things that you people above ground lack. I believe that these things could be exchanged for some fine wine as well as some fine art, including gems that increase power. With those items we Dark Elves can craft beautiful magical weapons. If you were to sell them outside, they should be items that nobles fight over to acquire. Shilin said to Han Shao, "Haha, don't worry, I won't let you down. Of course you also have to satisfy me as well. Let's get rich together," Han Shao happily said to the 5 Dark Elf girls who were about to become the next group of Dark Elf elders. Chapter 370 Summoning the old Fey corpse after Han Shao departed Dark Elves territory, the 5 female Dark Elves worked together to drag the corpse of Adele and the Dark Elf elders into one of the deepest cellar rooms. They falsely claimed to others that Adele and the other Dark Elf elders had already begun touring the world above. After a couple of days, the cellar was suddenly filled with tens of thousands of small spiders. It seemed as though every spider in Dark Elf territory had somehow made their way into the cellar. Somehow none of the Dark Elves within the territory detected these spiders. Tens of thousands of small spiders were densely packed together, completely filling up the cellar. As the spiders crazily squirmed on top of Adele's body, the small spiders began spitting a strange magical silk one after the other. As the silk fell onto Adele's body, the small spiders began drying up one after the other, losing their lives. They had spat out their very own life force along with the silk. This process continued for some time. Finally, after the tens of thousands of small spiders that had entered the cellar room had all spat out their life force, they all died within the cellar room. Adele's dried up and shriveled body slowly began withering. After a few days, only white skeletal bones remained. However, within Adele's skull there was actually an additional thumb-sized blue pearl that emitted a blue haze. The pearl was filled with the evil goddess Rose's evil power, similar to what Han Shao had previously absorbed. One day this blue pearl suddenly burst, expelling hundreds of thousands of blue-colored threads of silk. They inserted themselves within the bodies of the several Dark Elf elders that had already died. The silk actually began extracting strands of blue light from within the elder's body. Within just a moment's time, the body of all the several Dark Elf elders had completely transformed into ashes, blown away on the air. Then during the middle of the night, the blue-colored pearl slowly flew out of the cellar, flying towards the temple of evil goddess Rose. In the middle of the temple, an innocent and pure young female Dark Elf was facing the statue of Rose, piously praying. This Dark Elf young lady appeared to have the age of a 16 or 17-year-old human girl, seemingly uncorrupted by the profoundly lewd and evil cultures of the Dark Elf race. She worshipped Rose's statue, looking like a most devoted believer. While facing the statue of Rose, she kowtowed continuously while murmuring in the language of the Dark Elves. Suddenly the blue pearl flew over her head and hovered there. Then the blue pearl abruptly burst, emitting blue-colored rays of light that tightly wrapped around the young lady below. After the blue-colored pearl emitted its tremendous power, it began transferring that power into the young lady's body. The young lady began to shriek in pain, but the strands had tightly wound around every inch of her body, even sealing her mouth. So even her wretched screams were stifled as she struggled in vain. The young lady's originally jade-green pupils gradually turned white. The muffled shrieks also began to gradually quiet down. After a while, the blue pearl, along with the hundreds of thousands of blue strands of light, slowly began merging into the young lady's body. The blue-colored light continued to linger within the young lady's body as she collapsed in front of the statue. Only when it was nearly dawn did the blue light completely disappear and her pupils gradually regained their previous jade-green look. When the young lady stood up and faced the statue, she performed a rite in deep gratitude. Then she gnashed her teeth and said, "Brian, I will make you taste every iota of my suffering. I swear I will use the same method to kill you." At that moment a carefree and wild laugh echoed from the cemetery of death, brimming with the sound of joy and comfort. An approximately 2-meter tall old Fey zombie stood in front of Han Shao. Its body was covered with long green hair and its teeth and claws looked razor sharp. At long last Han Shao had successfully summoned it, and it wasted no time in roaring its displeasure. This advanced ranked zombie was actually not being restrained by the laws of the heavens and earth of the profound continent. Instead, it was clamoring in an immensely loud voice that spread powerfully throughout the cemetery of death, mixing with Han Shao's wild laughter. After the old Fey zombie roared, it raised its head and saw the creator of the contract in front of him. Unexpectedly, it shot straight towards him. Its speed made it seem like a bolt of green lightning as it flew, its 1-meter-long talons humming through the wind. It had an astonishingly and incomparably imposing aura. Damn it, it seems like it wasn't entirely successful. There's another part that needs fixing. Otherwise this formidable zombie would not have immediately attacked me right after arriving within this dimension. If this was during an actual battle, the necromancer would have been screwed. Han Shao cursed softly. Seeing the old Fey zombie charging at him, he hurriedly took out the demon slayer wretch. Han Shao's left hand grasped a skeleton staff. A quick wave and incantation later, an enormous bone shield crashed in front of Han Shao Shao right before a sharp bone spur could skewer him. The old Fey zombie's attack crashed audibly into the shield, with the latter exploding fiercely. The old Fey zombie tumbled to the ground from the force of the impact. The bone shield summoned by a Grand Magus was considerably more powerful and covered a wider area. Thus, when the old Fey zombie charged towards the bone shield, it couldn't pierce through the bone shield's defenses. It was only capable of cracking the shield. Without waiting for the old Fey zombie to scramble back up, the Demon Slayer edge suddenly flew out of Han Shao's hands. The screech of metal striking metal rang out as two of the old Fey zombie's sharp claws were severed. However, Han Shao was still shocked as he wondered exactly what on earth the old Fey zombie's sharp claws were made of. Only two claws had been shorn off after the Demon Slayer edge's strike descended, and that too with difficulty. Han Shao knew in his heart just how sharp the Demon Slayer edge was. Furthermore, after tempering it meticulously once more with enormous amounts of killing intent, it could effortlessly split rocks and chop metal. Han Shao truly had never anticipated that this old Fey zombie would actually be so frightening. When the Demon Slayer edge chopped downwards, it had only snapped apart two of its sharp claws. The old Fey zombie fell to a sitting position, baring its fangs and howling loudly once more. Then it once again launched itself toward Han Shao as he also began waving the skeleton staff in his hands again. This time 100 or so bone spears appeared, breaking through the skies. Although they were incapable of piercing the old Fey zombie, they were enough to force it to backtrack and retreat. Taking advantage of the respite, Han Shao relied on the contract's powerful connection to the other world and used the skeleton staff to forcefully return the old Fey zombie back to its world. It was not that Han Shao feared the old Fey zombie. It wasn't a difficult task for him to kill this old Fey zombie with his strength. However, because the old Fey zombie had begun launching attacks towards its master right after being summoned, Han Shao knew that there was a problem in his incantation. Thus, the most important problem currently was how to chant the summoning technique properly and not to continue dilly-dallying with the old Fey zombie. After Han Shao left the underground world, he had stayed within the Cemetery of Death for a few days and practiced Grand Magus ranked summoning techniques. After studying intensively for such a while, Han Shao had slowly started grasping the technique. Because of this, he was finally capable of summoning the old Fey zombie from another dimension today. The old Fey zombie immediately started to attack me after arriving at this dimension. It must be because it was not completely under the restricting power of the contract. Otherwise it would absolutely not dare to attack me. Han Shao muttered to himself while knitting his brows and reconsidering the details of the summoning technique he had just used. He took out the thick tome of necromancy and once again began reading it earnestly. After a little while, he suddenly had a thought flash into his mind as he cried out, Was I supposed to make the contract midway through? When Han Shao had used the summoning technique to call forth the old Fey zombie into the profound continent, he'd first used the incantation to create a connection with the other dimension. Then, after chanting some syllables to locate the old Fey zombie's position, Han Shao's mental strength had instantly traversed through an endless distance of the boundless space before arriving at the other dimension. Finally, Han Shao would then randomly target an old Fey zombie with his mental strength. Following these events, the mental strength must then be used to firmly suppress the old Fey zombie that was targeted. Then, while the old Fey zombie was being suppressed and was incapable of resisting, the zombie must be dragged into the space tunnel. The old Fey zombie would then pass through the space tunnel before finally descending on the profound continent. However, Han Shao noticed an annotation in a remote corner of the cryptic book. It stated that when a creature was in its original dimension, that would be when it was in its most formidable state. However, when it left its dimension and entered the space tunnel, it would enter its weakest state. But when it descended onto a material world, it would restore its power once more. It was only natural that zombies would always be at their most formidable when freely traversing through their own undead world. But after arriving within the material world of the profound continent, they would begin suffering to a certain extent due to a lack of intense death energy. Even so, zombies were still capable of exhibiting a powerful force within material worlds. As long as there were living creatures in the material world, death energy would certainly exist from the departed spirits. Although the death energy wouldn't be as pure and condensed as their own world, it would still be able to provide the zombies with necessary strength. Additionally, with the death energy that was innate to the zombies, their strength would also be on par with their strength on homeworld, even if they descended onto the profound continent. However, The process of entering the material world inevitably required entering through the profound space tunnel. This distance should have originally been distant beyond measure but was shrunk to the span of an instant under either the powerful influence of the contract, the caster's mental energy, or rules of space encompassed in the contract. According to the differences in one's mental prowess as a necromancer and one's skill at chanting spells, the speed with which a zombie entered through the space tunnel from its dimension and entered the material world would also differ. The stronger a necromancer was and the better they understood the essence of necromancy magic, the less time a necromancer would waste on incantations. Under normal circumstances, when a magic apprentice became an archmage, it would take 3 to 5 seconds for a zombie to leave its dimension and enter this material world. As for Han Shao, he could already be considered as at the Grand Magus rank. Thus, he only needed a brief second. If the spell was cast by a sacred Magus necromancer, then the time to traverse the space tunnel would be calculated in the milliseconds. As a result, the zombie would descend onto the material world in a flash right after the incantation was complete. The process of chanting the incantation was in reality just a way to communicate with the creature in the other dimension. It was a string of events related to finding, suppressing, and binding the creature to the contract. However, regardless of whether one was a magic apprentice having just entered the world of necromancy or a sacred magus who had already deeply understood the essence of necromancy, as a sacred magus, a summoning always required traversing space tunnels. This was true whether the summoned creature was the weakest skeleton warrior or the most frightening undead bone dragon. Although the time to travel through the space tunnel depended on a magician's strength, this step is unavoidable. According to this note, it seemed that regardless of how strong the undead creature was, they all became extremely weak when brought into the space tunnel devoid of death energy. According to the contents within the book, taking advantage of that moment of weakness to enforce the contract was the most logically secure method. Han Shao seemed to have suddenly comprehended something as his heart somewhat stirred. He began to chant the spell once again. After carefully concentrating his mental power to an optimal state, he connected with an old Fey zombie in the other dimension as the syllables of the incantation rose and fell. During the spirited struggling from the old Fey zombie, Han Shao's mental energy burst out like a mountain flood, suppressing the zombie's struggle. Following the continued chanting of the necromancy spell, Han Shao's mental energy gradually eliminated the old Fey zombie's resistance. He then drove the old Fey zombie to enter and cross through the space tunnel with the appropriate syllables. The moment the old Fey zombie faded into the space tunnel, Han Shao immediately exerted all his strength to rapidly conclude the contract in less than a second. 1 second later, the old Fey zombie suddenly descended in front of Han Shao in the cemetery of death. After lightly exhaling, Han Shao brightly gazed and stared attentively at the old Fey zombie that had just been summoned. He would be prepared for any sudden contingencies. This time the hideous-looking old Fey zombie didn't make any movement whatsoever. It wasn't like last time, charging wildly toward Han Shao. After deeply and attentively watching the old Fey zombie for a while, Han Shao gradually grew happier in his heart. He tried to transmit a command. The old Fey zombie immediately began flying in a circle. Although Han Shao felt a feeling of impatience verging on loathing from the old Fey zombie for forcing it to do such a pointless action, it continued to fly according to Han Shao's command. Resistance was impossible under the contract's power. Success! I finally succeeded. Han Shao wildly laughed out loud as he felt a strong sense of satisfaction taking over his heart. Obviously this time's incantation was a success. The necromancy Grand Magus level old Fey zombie summoning technique had finally truly been realized under Han Shao's assiduous hard work. Being able to successfully use this meant that grasping the next summoning techniques for the Bone Devil and Mummy Lords would now become much quicker and easier.